Hello, world. A very good afternoon from Sydney, Australia. I am Sashi Singh, and welcome to Sashi Singh's Talking Point. Starting a bit differently today, let's acknowledge some of our viewers on Facebook as we go Facebook Live. Chandra Segran is watching with us. From California, Dinesh Solanki is also watching. Rakesh and Saras Prasad, Bulla, everyone, they say. Thank you very much. Naresh Kumar from Newcastle is with us. Thank you, Naresh. And Nithya Reddy is watching, and I believe it's his birthday today. Nithya, a very, very happy birthday to you. And we have our regulars, Roland Lilo from Wayavi in Lautoka. Peg Swaroop is watching. Tevita Talanoa Whakaifo. Thank you, Tevita, for watching as well. And welcome. Welcome to episode 12 of Sashi Singh's Talking Point program today. We will shortly be joined by Ms. Sashi Kiran, the founder and CEO of F.R.I.E.N.D in Fiji. We will find out a lot more about the NGO and the work it has been doing in Fiji. In times of disaster and crisis in Fiji, many people in Fiji contact F.R.I.E.N.D for assistance. There's a lot of great things that F.R.I.E.N.D has been doing. And this afternoon, we will allow our chief guest, Ms. Sashi Kiran, to enlighten us about the NGO, the work they do, etc. As we begin, may I please request that you share the SSTP page on your own timelines so that we may share the interview with Ms. Sashi Kiran with as many interested people as possible. To ensure that you receive instant notifications for all future programs, please like the SSTP page, and more importantly, please follow the program by clicking onto the follow button, and you'll never miss a program or an announcement on the SSTP page. Welcome to the Thinking People's program, Sashi Singh's Talking Point, live on Facebook. We begin episode 12 of SSTP with a warm welcome to our regular contributor, former Fiji TV journalist, Nikhil Singh, to tell us of the key happenings of the political week in Fiji and in Australia. Nikhil, a very good afternoon. Welcome to SSTP.
Hello, Sashi. Good afternoon.
Now, just before you begin, Nikhil, some breaking news. I've heard from my sources that the Prime Minister, Frank Bainimarama, has been admitted to the Suva Private Hospital, the Oceania, with an undisclosed ailment, less than 2 weeks after his return from cardiac surgery in Australia. Sources have said that he has an infection. However, there is no formal announcement at this stage. We'll keep watching for news on that front. And let's wish the Prime Minister a speedy recovery as the country gears for a very, very important election year. Sticking to Fiji, Nikhil, the Minister for Economy has been holding budget consultations around the country with a mini budget announcement around the corner. And we have a proposal on the national minimum wage as well. What do you have for us on that front?
Sashi, the consultation ahead of the mini budget announcement is occurring at lightning speed, I'd say, because the mini budget, as we understand, will be delivered in a week's time. Consultation started just over a couple of weeks ago, if I'm not mistaken. I think there are no surprises about what ordinary citizens are telling this government in their roadshows, the consultation meetings they're having. The ordinary citizens are talking about the cost of living pressures, the lack of proper infrastructure. If you look at the state of roads, hospitals, for example, lack of consistent supply of safe drinking water in many areas, intermittent electricity, to name a few. I mentioned last week about the national minimum wage review announced by the government. They are proposing an increase of somewhere between $3.45 and $3.65 an hour. Now, A war of words has erupted between the employment minister and the workers' representative of the Fiji Trades Union Congress after Minister Praveen Bala accused the FTUC of not participating in the consultation process. Firstly, the FTUC has rejected the government's proposal and has also given the employment minister a refresher on the consultation process. FTUC General Secretary Felix Anthony said the Employment Relations Act required the Ministry of Employment to convene an Employment Relations Advisory Board meeting to consult with the social partners and on the minimum wage. Instead, government decided to consult the public first, and we understand that this is election year, so they need to create a hype in public, according to Anthony. Anthony goes on to say, and I quote, "We in the FTUC do not take part in any meetings where we will be used to rubber stamp government decisions and for government to parade in the international community of its desire to consult with social partners. And that the minister needs to learn and learn fast as his term is almost coming to an end and he has yet to grasp the very basics of industrial relations." Sashi.
Thank you, Nikhil. I mean, it seems that the election campaign has started and the roadshow is truly on. And some people have actually raised concerns that it is a big cost on the taxpayers, and that money could be well utilized in other places. Now, the Fiji Independent Commission Against Corruption, FICAC, uh, FICAC's independence and impartiality has been questioned yet again. What do you have to report on this front, Nikhil?
Sachi, you're right. This is not the first time and probably won't be the last for the Fiji Independent Commission Against Corruption's independence and impartiality to be questioned. The Fiji Times has reported that the opposition leader, Ratu Nengama Lalambalavu, has cast doubts on the Commission's independence. The Fiji Times reports that Ratu Nengama expressed his disgust at the ordeal he and other MPs have been subjected to, being under a cloud of suspicion that damaged their reputation and standing as national and traditional leaders. His comments came as FICAC declined to lay criminal charges against five opposition Sodelpa members of parliament after a 20-month investigation. Ratu Nengama Lalambalaw in a statement said, and I quote, "The 20-month long FICAC investigation was without basis and its initiation was likely politically motivated. I was never formally informed by FICAC that it was conducting an investigation, let alone caution interviewed by the so-called independent commission. Yet this cloud of suspicion has hung over me and my family for 20 long months since June 2020. Without formal notification of the complaint against me or the investigation, the matter was blown up in the media over the last 20 months and has greatly damaged my standing and reputation as national and traditional leader." He goes on to say, "It appears that our ordeal has been unnecessarily prolonged for an individual to be cleared of such spurious allegations. While it is a great relief to have been cleared, I would question the independence of this investigative body. Let the facts speak for themselves for the public to evaluate the number of individuals whose liberty and freedom have been threatened, their reputation and standing damaged since FICAC was established, all subject to strict bail conditions for years. Then in the end, FICAC either did not file charges, withdraw charges, or failed to get convictions." Shashi.
Well, Nikhil, this is election year. My prediction is that FICAC is going to be in the forefront in the next few months with some other charges, that's for sure. Now, former Fiji National University Vice Chancellor Nigel Healy has dropped a bombshell. Do we have a diploma mill operating in Fiji?
Some serious allegations, Sashi. The former Vice Chancellor, Professor Nigel Healy, has alleged that some Fiji National University staff bought quote, qualifications from diploma mills in order to upgrade their qualifications. The Fiji Times reports that in a in a paper published in the Journal of Higher Education Policy and Management, Healy said a related structural disadvantage that adversely impacted the university stemmed from the absence of an effective national system to verify overseas qualifications. He says while the Fiji Higher Education Commission was notionally mandated with the assessment and recognition of foreign qualifications, in practice it had no processes or expertise to fulfill this function. As the pressure mounted on the academic staff to upgrade their qualifications in service, there were cases where staff chose to buy online qualifications from diploma mills. The Fiji Higher Education Commission said it will respond to the allegations at a later date.
All right, and I guess Fijians will have to dig a little deeper into their pockets with the price of another staple going up. What's the latest on this front?
Well, Sashi, if you like Rocky, then we have to spare a thought for thousands of Fijians who will now have to grapple with an increase in the cost of flour announced last week. Depending on the quantity, the increases range from 18% to 24%. So we're not just talking a few cents, Sashi. If you were to now buy a bag of a 50 kilo bag of flour, the price has gone from $59.51 to $70.64. That's an increase of $11.13. I mentioned earlier, Sachi, about the cost of living pressures. In recent weeks and months, we have seen an increase in the price of sugar, the price of fuel. According to the Fiji Times, the National Federation Party says the increase in flour prices is just the beginning of an increased period of economic hardship for low income families. The Fiji Labour Party has called for the immediate removal of the 9% value added tax or VAT on basic food items to lower the high cost of food. The party leader, Mahendra Chaudhry, said that at a time when so many families are unable to afford one decent meal, the Fiji Competition and Commerce Commission has decided to increase the price of flour. He said the government must provide immediate relief and remove the 9% it imposed on basic food items in the 2016 national budget.
Now, Nikhil, closer to home here in Australia, last week we shared the tragic news of Australian cricket legend Shane Warne's passing. Do you have an update on the funeral plans?
So Shane Warne's body arrived on a chartered plane on Thursday evening, Sashi. There are media reports that the cricket legend's family will hold a private service ahead of a public memorial at the Melbourne Cricket Ground on the 30th of March. So that's the end of the month. That is expected to be a very big event. Thousands will be in attendance. Shane Warne's family has accepted the Victorian government's offer of a state funeral. There are reports that a memorial could also be held at the Sydney Cricket Ground. So we await confirmation on that, Sashi.
Yes, what a tragedy indeed for a real legend of cricket. Now, Nikhil, finally, a bit delayed, I guess, but the federal government has finally declared the recent floods in Queensland and northern New South Wales a national emergency. What does this mean for those impacted by the floods?
Sashi, too little, too late is how some, including the Queensland Premier, are describing Scott Morrison's announcement of a national emergency. The announcement came some 10 days after what is said to be the worst floods in history in Queensland and northern New South Wales. The emergency declaration basically gives the federal government power to deploy money and resources faster. A range of measures, including relief packages for the flood victims, have now been announced by the federal government, Sashi.
All right, well, Nikhil, thank you very, very much for another fine presentation of things making the news headlines in Fiji and in Australia. Looking forward to seeing you in the next program. Have a safe and blessed day.
Thank you, Sashi.
Cheers now. You are watching Sashi Singh's Talking Point on Facebook Live. We ask the questions that Fijians all over the world want answers to. Now, it's not always the case that we talk to politicians on SSTP. Today, we discover an NGO that has become a household name in Fiji. Now it's time to meet our chief guest. Our chief guest this afternoon is Ms. Sashi Kiran, the founder and CEO of F.R.I.E.N.D, an NGO in Fiji that has been doing so much for the communities in Fiji. Today, we look at the work that F.R.I.E.N.D does in Fiji. A very good afternoon and namaste, Sashiji. Welcome to Sashi Singh's Talking Point.
Thank you so much for the invitation on the show. Very good afternoon and Bulavinaka to all the listeners around the world.
So nice to have you along. Today is a show of two Sashis, Sashi Singh and Sashi Kiran. So it should be a very, very interesting afternoon as both of us address each other as Sashi. So, as they say, great minds think alike. Look, it's a pleasure to have you on the show. Now, how would you describe your early childhood, Sashi?
I grew up in rural farm area in Lotoka, and compared to now, I think I had a very blissful, peaceful childhood. You could go from home to school and school to home, and there'll be people cutting cane and peeling it off and giving it to you to eat along the way and picking guavas and all that. My father and his brothers had a huge influence in my life, and I think what I am is because what I experienced in a rural setting.
Now, I believe you were a former journalist.
I worked for the media. I worked for Communications Fiji Limited for a couple of years. Then I was part of the Review magazine doing the investigative stories. Until after that, I joined the FCOS, a umbrella NGO. But while I was doing that, I was hosting a talk show with Mr. Shoklingam till the eve of 2000 crisis. We used to do a morning show where I used to call politicians on the spot and ask them questions every morning. So I've had, work with the media.
All right. Well, that was my starting point as well with Communications Fiji Limited, the old FM 96, when I first got back from New Zealand after studies. Well, let's get straight to our discussion for today regarding your organization, F.R.I.E.N.D, F-R-I-E.N.D. What is F.R.I.E.N.D and when was it established, Sashi?
It's a mouthful. It was established after 2000. But because we wanted the word rural in it and the word integrated in it and the word foundation in it, it became quite a long name. Post 2000, I think we all are very aware of 2000 events of 2000. Civil unrest, we saw evictions, we saw two communities polarized, we saw a lot of violence. So at that time, working for an umbrella NGO, I had access. I was doing a lot of, I just re-established the District Council of Social Services. And because women were largely missing in these conversations, I helped establish a rural women's network called F.R.I.E.N.D at the time. And when 2000 happened, I had the opportunity to go around Fiji, largely where there was a lot of violence. One of our network women called me. She was raped in Singatoka. So as I started traveling and listening to stories, and then later on when we saw the Vanuatu crisis evolving, I visited that area. I was quite disheartened by and maybe I was too young, I was in my mid-20s. I was very disillusioned by the existing organizations, which were both the statutory organizations which were there to support religious and other support organizations, because people were suffering and there was so much fear on the ground. So one day I was sitting in one of the conferences in Suva and I was just disillusioned, and I said to my cousin and one of my best friends from childhood, this is not something I want to be. Suva, I think even now Suva is in a blissful different world while the West suffers. And sitting in Suva was not something I wanted to do. I wanted solutions for the people on the ground. So I developed a concept and I worked with my cousin who was a journalist at the time. She's migrated since. And I had a lawyer friend, Marie Chen, We used to meet regularly. My house was largely a place of discussion of issues. We used to solve the entire country's problem. And we, so discuss this concept. And I asked for their help in registration, which they did. Marie was starting her own law firm, Marie Chen, and so she said, I can't give you too much time. And Sandhya was involved with the whole media thing. So, but they provided me with the moral support, the platform, the registration for me to get off the ground. And then I left Suva and came back to the Western Division. My heart that time was in Banwalevu because that was far worse. But West was an area I knew, and this was an area of work I did not know how this will shape. So I decided to move to the West where I had family and started from here. That's where it
Okay,
started.
and you said it was a mouthful. Let me just read out what FRIEND stands for. It's the Foundation for Rural Integrated Enterprises and Development. Thank God you've shortened it to FRIEND, and a friend to so many people. So, I take it that the brainchild, the whole brainchild was yours right from the word go. That's how FRIEND was born.
Yes, it was, let's say it was a risk that paid off. At that time, it was just concept, abstract. I was looking at the needs of the people, and we thought, okay, these are the things which probably would respond to it better. And 20 years back, looking back now, I'm like kind of amazed at how things have developed because we didn't know I didn't know what I was getting into.
All right. Well, starting from the early days, what was the main aim and what was the objective that you had in mind?
As you know, at that time, the economy had collapsed and there were a lot of people in poverty. So that was a key area to work with. And in order to work with poverty, and remember at that time there were evictions, people had moved, there was very little people could do for income generation. So my whole concept was, what's the local skill and resource that people know that we could help them translate into income generation? So that was key. Also, I realized that people had very limited saving. So income generation and saving were the key things it started off with. Also, students were struggling with scholarship. And in my travels, I had met diaspora living in England, international Fiji movement. They started sending my money, and their dollar to dollar cash was going for scholarship, and we ran that for 10 years. So those were the kind of early programs. But one of the key things that bugged me a lot at the time, and it still bugs me, is the race relations. So whatever we were doing, I was hoping that we could get the two different ethnic groups together. So most of our programs were making sure that the different ethnic groups were coming together. And at that time, I had committed to myself that if anybody wants service, they'll be served. Nobody would be left behind. And when we started the office, one of the early people who started coming were hardened criminals, actually.
Mm-hmm.
So we started with, I remember, having a fight with the existing board at that time on helping ex-offenders. And anyway, we started. And then I realized to help ex-offenders was very hard because their culture and the way were built, every time you give them something, it's lost the next day. So we started a program inside the prison. We thought, okay, let's go where they are first. And it was called a REAL program, Restorative Justice Program. And we worked with the boys inside and we worked with the families outside. We did the traditional apology outside, then we got the family together and so on. And that program, when it was evaluated by an Australian consultant, had 80% success rate. And it later on became the yellow ribbon. It's changed a lot from the original concept. But at that time, the Commissioner, Nevalarua, and the OC, who was at the Lautoka prisons, a lot of that elements were carried into the yellow ribbon. And because we thought, oh, it's already being resourced by the government, we stepped out of that space. But we continued to work with street kids and other people.
Well, as we know, I mean, you've said that from what you started off with, the Yellow Ribbon Project has changed quite a lot since your departure, and let's not go there. Now, you mentioned a previous board, but looking at FRIEND where it stands today, what's the structure of FRIEND? You have a board of directors, you have trustees. What is the structure?
Yes, we have three trustees and we have a board of directors. Andi Makalesi Tawengia, a chiefly lady from Vesesi village, is our president, has been involved with F.R.I.E.N.D for some time. We have, you've spoken with Richard on your program. Richard is a board member, Richard Naidu. Dr. Samuela Korovo, he works for the university. So there are different people with different support for the different programs. We have Radhika, who's our treasurer. She's a senior accountant with with an accounting firm. Mr. Damain Gander, Mrs. Mereseni Belailevuka, Daryl Radcharan. So these are the people who are kind of behind the scenes, but they're very involved. Like during the pandemic, we were having almost daily conversations. When we were dealing with medical, we were talking to Dr. Sam on a regular basis. When we started moving to Suva, we were talking to Richard. And on a monthly basis, normally we meet quarterly, but during the pandemic, we were meeting like monthly, just so that I could keep them updated on how things were progressing. It was changing very, very rapidly at the time.
Well, you have a very broad spectrum of people behind you, which augurs very well for any organization. And I love the word integrated, that integration of talent, that integration of experience can only do magic for your organization. Now, you're the CEO of the organization. What is your role as CEO?
So I do a lot of the listening on the ground. What's the need, and program planning and development and interventions. I have to find the funding. So to find funding is not easy. You have to prove your credibility. You have to be very accountable. We are constantly audited by external donors, and we have our own external audits as well. So carrying all that, making sure there's funding, the staff are there, the programs are developed, programs are created, and no program when it ends with funding just ends. We continue with the program in some form or the other to follow through for the communities. Yeah, I guess that's what I do.
All right. I know you're doing a wonderful job because I've been reading about you and F.R.I.E.N.D for so many years now. And that is why I thought I'd invite you to the program, explore a bit of the good work that you do, and get a sound basis of the work that F.R.I.E.N.D does in Fiji, which I believe is so important. Now, what were the early days like for your organization? Were there many struggles in establishing or getting F.R.I.E.N.D off the ground?
Yes. I think when I started, when you were younger, you're more idealistic. You have a concept and you think it'll take off. And I had very strong credibility with donors at the time because I was doing programming for another organization. But when I started, I discovered that donors are risk averse. They don't like to take risks with new organizations. And I had left my job because I didn't believe that, I wasn't doing justice working there and setting something else up. So then I would work for peace building. I was doing a lot of consultancy and conflict resolution in peace building. And whatever money I'll get, then I would pay staff out of that. And bulk of the expense, early years expense, was covered by my personal expenses to get it started. But it still had to have all the accountability mechanisms because I had to show a few years of audited accounts and so on before anybody would believe in us. And also we had very good media because I was part of the media fraternity, but I asked the media to leave us alone for a few years because we didn't want to talk big and then fall flat on our face. And it was a lot of struggles. We didn't have vehicles, we didn't have resources. And it meant hopping on a bus to go into communities, to do a lot of listening and, running the programs. And I had a volunteer, Mariani Lomavere, with me, and she's still with us. So yeah, the early days are a struggle. And when we started the livelihood program, which I thought was needed, we were asking women, what are your skills and resources? So we started with chutneys and pickles. And when I took it to corporate, most corporate organizations said, why should we buy it from you? And
All right, I'll stop you there, Sashi, because I want to talk separately about that project and a few other projects. So I don't want you to spoil it right now. All right, now, still sticking to the early days, I understand that very early part of your organization's inception, F.R.I.E.N.D was the only NGO that was invited to host the heir to the British throne, His Royal Highness Prince Charles, in May of 2005. How did this come about?
That was interesting as well. Um, the Deputy British High Commissioner had passed F.R.I.E.N.D. F.R.I.E.N.D was kind of in the news already, even though we were trying to keep a low profile. And he purchased some of the ex-offenders' art pieces, because we had started the art work with the ex-offenders, and they were great artists, and we had some on display. And then the British High Commissioner called me and said, somebody very important is coming, and we'd like you to host them. And we're such a tiny organization at that time. And we were also, it didn't kind of register what's happening. I think until a week before he was supposed to come, and Scotland Yard came and started doing the security checks and all that. Then it actually hit us. We need to start preparing. Then if you see the pictures of those days, we started doing, all these Vanguard sheets, charts and sheets to show Prince Charles what it was all about. And we had, by then we had quite a few people involved in livelihood. So we had tents, and he came and he spent some time with the staff, and it was an amazing experience. And that did take us to the world stage very quickly.
So, because I was just about to ask you, what did Prince Charles's visit mean for F.R.I.E.N.D? And you said it took you onto the world stage. So I take it that was in terms of publicity. That must have been a great, great boost to F.R.I.E.N.'s image, both locally and internationally. Would that be correct?
Yes, but I was always very nervous with image.
Mm-hmm.
I was always thinking that we should do the work, and the work speak for ourselves, because the minute you are hyped up, people have these expectations for you, and then if you can't live up to it, you fall flat on your face. So it was a bit unnerving at that particular time. And Prince Charles actually bought a whole bunch of our products. We already had the glass jars at the time, and he took it. And he was interested in having it, because he has his own cottage industry and love for it in England. And we sort of talked around it, and their teams talked to us about it. But the glass jars, and by the time the freight cost was happening to England, it was quite expensive. But it did give us a window into a global market. How does markets work? Costing and freight and all those things. So it was definitely a learning experience.
Now, when you started, what were the early signs of poverty in the community? You mentioned when you were in Suva, you were quite concerned about people in the Northern Division in Lambasa, for instance. But if you look at it nationally, when you started your projects, what was early signs of poverty in Fiji like?
I think if you remember, if I remember correctly, in 1999, I think UNDP had launched a poverty report which said something like 25% of Fiji's population lived in poverty. And that in itself was not a right signal for us. But because I was visiting rural areas already, I remember very well some of the early case studies, meeting a woman in, say, Rekireki market. And she said she has to look after her mother-in-law and children, and she was sick, and she was selling cassava. And what it hit me was that when people are so disconnected, they come far from their home to sell in market, and if people don't purchase, they go home with very limited cash. They have no access to health, and at that time market facilities and things were not very good. So there was a poverty that was obvious. Well, people define poverty, I suppose, largely by the economic, but we could also see there was poverty of access to information. We still had babies, and we still have babies dying of diarrhea, for example. And some of the things I couldn't really relate to, that there was so much poverty of access to information, access to networking, and of course, access to livelihoods, access to markets. That hasn't changed in many parts of Fiji. So the issues and challenges were very much there, and access to health. But what was very disturbing post 2000 was the total collapse of the ethnic relationship. For example, I'm not sure if you know Vanuatu. Like, I remember Wainikoro, which is like a couple hours away from Lambasa, rural town. And when people were up and evicted from there. Then the Fijians said, well, we were depending on the Indians to buy our fish and our coconuts. So like I don't think we ever think about how symbiotic our relationship is and how interdependent we are. So we were seeing sort of structure. It was not one ethnic group that was suffering. It was something that was obvious that economically both communities were quite affected, but communities were traumatized. It had a bitter taste in terms of relationships. So there was so much more going on when you talk about poverty that needed interventions, I thought at the time.
So how did F.R.I.E.N.D identify the struggles in the community? I mean, you gave us that example of that lady in the Rekureki market and things that you were seeing, that interaction, for instance, in Wanikoro, the villagers said that we expected the Indian population to buy our coconuts and fish, a symbiotic relationship, as you said. How did you identify the struggles in the community?
So remember I said that I was working for an umbrella organization, and after that, when 2000 happened, I actually would travel around, especially where the evictions and all that was happening. I would go and listen to many of those areas. And when I did some work with the race relations and peace building, I went and listened to other communities. And then when right as soon as F.R.I.E.N.D started, there was Cyclone Amy hit Lambasa quite badly. And that I think was the first time something like 13 people had died because some timber that was stocked on top came down the river and killed people. So every opportunity I had, I was on the ground and I was listening. And so those listening, and even today when we do programming, and even if our team goes out, I go out and we are constantly listening. And that helped us develop the interventions.
Now, Sashi, from the time F.R.I.E.N.D started to the present point in time, what is your analysis of the poverty level in Fiji? Look, we read figures that 30 odd percent of the poverty line, 30 odd percent. It's a
Yeah.
number, but when you, as a community leader, when you're on the ground level, what is your perception of poverty in Fiji right now?
Yes, ADB I think has said 30%, 29.9%. But that was 1999, 2000, prior to pandemic. What I've seen in the pandemic, so just again going a little bit on statistics. So Reserve Bank said 150,000 people were left unemployed post 2000, the first wave of pandemic. 150,000 people out of 800,000 people we have. So you can imagine the dependence. And the last statistics I've seen from Reserve Bank, I think, is 25,000 people have been re-employed in the recent times. That leaves more than 100,000 people still unemployed, Sashi. And what that means is we are seeing on the ground on a daily basis. You remember there were 2 rounds of government grants, 360 in Diwali and around that time. But Christmas, we were beginning to see very, very sad realities. What we've seen is people who have been completely unemployed. So if there were 5, 6 people in the house, all working, completely unemployed now, they can't afford to pay their mortgage, they can't afford to buy their grocery. Shamima and I did some listening. By that I mean we had women in spaces where we actually spent time, whole day listening, and nobody could stop the tears, because even the time when people were getting some FNPF, and my fault was also, when we started food distribution, we said formal sector is getting FNPF allowance and non-formal sector is not getting anything. So we were basically focused on non-formal sector. But we heard that even the people who were on formal sector and getting $120 a fortnight, there was a woman who shared how she couldn't afford medication and her child died. And she was actually told to go to the mortuary and put her child in the mortuary by herself. We heard another story where a mother could not afford medication and had to wait for the next FNPF to come. This was when FNPF was there. Now today there are these 100,000 people unemployed, but you have, which I assume, because the Reserve Bank is saying 25,000 people are employed, I assume that still large numbers of people are unemployed. They do not have any social welfare support. So if you look at the tourism sector in particular, 1/3 of tourism sector is supposedly, by data, is 30% is women. Many of them in low-paying housekeeping kind of jobs. Many of them were single mothers or widows, or people dependent on them. Now they have been without job for more than 2.5 years, and there's no social welfare scheme they have been able to go on to. So people are struggling to get food on the table, and we continue to provide food to the unemployed in Nandi in particular. People are unable to access medication. We've just got a medical team going around in the communities for NCDs, because when the pandemic happened, Lotoka Hospital was shut down and continued to do special clinics only. Lots of people who had diabetes and pressure could not afford medication, and have had not access for more than a year. So we are providing medications at those sorts of places. We are seeing extreme poverty. Some of the people I visited recently, where we are assisting with livelihood. For example, a woman, her husband just got injured, can't work, 5 boys, and she was selling food at airport before, and she can't. And very extreme case. But we have given her a small machine that she wanted, and she's got some from November. She's got some income going. Another woman who had quite a few of those cases we are hearing where people actually collapse, saying we had a standard of living. These were chefs and people who were doing really well for themselves, and in 2.5 years they have no savings left. Last week, an engineer, aircraft engineer, had stroke. Nowhere to live, dependent on food. I'll give you one more before you ask me another question. A finance person, working for tourism sector, completely bedridden now, stroke. They have a special needs child. So in 2.5 years now, there's nothing, and FNPF is not allowing them withdrawal on medical grounds. So they really are dependent on whoever can give them food or wheelchair or adult diaper. So people who were doing well for themselves have collapsed. Now imagine those people who were already on the streets and who were already poor. So it's not pretty on the ground. It's quite a difficult thing to see on the ground on a daily basis.
Well, my heart just goes out to the people, and it is mind-boggling that in times of dire straits that a person cannot even have access to his FNPF account, even during such serious illnesses. Now, Sashi, the community at large, as you've just mentioned, a number of them are really on struggle street. How does the community reach out to Friend? I mean, how do people contact you for assistance, and how do you actually identify the real needs of the community?
Um, it's interesting how we've been embedded in the community for 20 years now. And for Nandi and Lotoka, because we've been giving food and all for 2.5 years, people have our contacts. We generally put links on social media, and people apply through that. Then my team calls and assesses people on their food need, for example, or medical need. We have constant requests for wheelchairs and mobility aid. But also we have very good contacts in Vanuatu. I guess we've been around long enough that people have access to our Facebook page, inbox, they email us, they call us. And earlier, and because we've been always on the ground, people have access to our phone numbers. So it hasn't been hard. And post floods, for example, we've had, the district officers give us the list, or the advisory councillors give us the list. And then we go, our teams on the ground, they go and assess. So it's access is not an issue. People can access us quite easily.
All right, that's wonderful news at all. And you mentioned a wheelchair, and I saw you handing over a wheelchair to Alan Lockington the other day. I saw that post, and a photograph was sent to me by my good friend, my brother Roland Lilo, as well. He was there as well when you were handing that wheelchair. Now, you are watching Sashi Singh's Talking Point, and our chief guest this afternoon is Ms. Sashi Kiran, the founder and CEO of F.R.I.E.N.D. If you've joined us for the first time this afternoon, please like and follow the SSTP page so that you may receive instant notifications of all posts and all interviews on this program. Now, Sashi, at this juncture, I'd like to discuss your programs, some of the initiatives undertaken by your organization. Perhaps I should begin by asking you about the Sahara Program. What was that all about?
Remember, I mentioned the scholarship program we had for students.
Yes.
So that was largely funded by International Fiji Movement, the Indian diaspora based in London. And they used to send me £3,000 each year, which was about 10,000 Fijian dollars. And dollar to dollar, we used to make sure that amount went to schools. And from there, the receipts used to go to them. And every time they would visit, they would go and meet the children and so on. So that ran for 10 years. And the whole idea was providing support to kids for education program.
And then with that education program, F.R.I.E.N.D embarked on what you termed the Generation Project, the Tamarind Chutney Project. Correct me if I'm wrong, was this the start of the Generation Project? What was that all about?
The income generation, yes. So the income generation was one of the key things. And in this country, you really can't talk about race relations. So we were hoping that we will start with livelihoods and make sure that we are working underground to work on building relationships. So a lot of workshops, any workshops we do, we make sure people from all ethnic groups came. So income generation, yes, we started. I was doing a lot of trials myself, learning from the elders in the households. We'd ask them how did they preserve food and so on. So we would cook and we'll do the trials, and that was then bottled. And we had late sister Satya Bali, a beautiful human being who was running Senior Citizen Center at that time. And she was also struggling with funding to run the center. So her people did the tamarind chutney, which we launched. And I started making chili chutney at home as one of the income generation based on some of the recipes I'd learned. So these were like the two products we tried testing and by putting it in the market in 2003, yes.
Quite
We
some
launched.
time back. And I believe with that Tamarind Chutney Project, that's just gone from strength to strength, hasn't it?
Now it has, but at that time we were at the butt of the joke. We were, and even now people say, "Oh, you chutney people," very derogatorily actually. That as if chutney is quite a poor thingy. But that for us, for me, and the philosophy or of the organization still is what's local, what's resource. Like instead of always looking for outside, what do we have as a strength? And when I took that, if you don't mind me sharing this, when I took it to the corporate sector, that was the worst. I mean, the feedback I received was extremely negative. And because the imported products were coming in cheaper from India and still does. People say our prices are high. It is high because by the time you buy from, we don't have bulk buying like Asia. So, you buy fruits at a place and everything shrinks. So, if somebody's selling you something for $6 a kilo, chilies or, $10 a kilo, by the time it shrinks and all, a value addition is a costly affair. So business sector told me that this will not work. Lots of people told me this will not work. And something I've hated, one part of F.R.I.E.N.D that I've hated was I would go and stand in the supermarkets for tasting. You know how people stand with plates for tasting? So I would go and do that when we put out products in the supermarket. That was a requirement. Like I would stand there with volunteers, we'll get people to taste it. We'll clean the shelves. We had to bag people to put our products. And I must give credit to MH, Mr. Kunasilan, who's still in Fiji. He was one of the first ones who put it out in the early days. But that and I'll tell you, 5 years later, when we had launched a little shop in Suva, somebody from Chefs Association came and said to me, "We've been testing your products for 5 years, and we've seen it's very good quality. It has no bacteria and this and that." And I was quite shocked that somebody was actually testing our product. But what happened after that period was then the hotels started buying. So then the hotels have been buying in bulk. And then slowly we developed and we've never had any budget. And if you'll see, you won't see much ads. And about 5 years ago, we were very thankful that Motibhai came on board as a distributor. And if they're doing most of the promotion and advertising. Until then, to put it in supermarkets, to clean it up and all that, we had to do it ourselves. And my specialty is community development, but I had to learn all those things in sales. And that has generated enough income for us to start medical program. when there's no funding and there's a need, that's the income generation that's helping us reach the communities.
We'll discuss the medical program, etc. Now, are you marketing this overseas as well?
Yes.
Your products like tamarind and things, chutney and things.
Yes, they are being they're both in Australia and New Zealand. They have also gone to US. So Motibai has found distributors, and our products goes overseas, and there has been a very good reception.
Well, a big thank you to Mac Patel and his team at Multi Buys, always looking after the community in Fiji. Mac, if you listening and watching, congratulations, well done. And to my viewers in Sydney, Melbourne, in Australia, and in New Zealand, go to your local supermarket and look for the F.R.I.E.N.D brand and support by spending a few dollars and buying those chutneys. Now, I guess, I believe in 2004, sorry, go
Since you,
ahead.
since you mentioned Mr. Mac Patel, I will tell you a story, and I know you'll
Yes.
ask me this question later, but cards. Um, I gate crashed into Mr. Patel's office one day, and he said to me, "You undetermined woman," because I really, literally ended in an office. Like I said, gave me 5 minutes, please, of your time, and there were crafts and things we were selling. And as stern and as he looked, and he has a very generous heart, and he immediately started putting our products in crowds even before they were distributing. So our products, he was actually able to sell through the duty free in crowds years ago. And I always give
Wonderful.
a lot of credit and respect for Mr. Patel.
Now, in 2004, there was another project, homemade cards. I think you just briefly mentioned that. What did this project entail?
So at that time, the Spartica agreement ended, and the garment industry went through a very challenging period. And in the garment industry, there were a lot of people living with disabilities, and especially deaf people were employed. And I had a cousin who was deaf, and I started hearing the stories of how these deaf people were getting unemployed. And I asked him, "Can you call a meeting?" And I thought there'll be a handful of people. In the first meeting, he called off the deaf youth. Were 60 deaf youths in my compound, 60, and they all had these issues. We were serving up till now, and we have no income. And I realized at that time that the skills were low, they could not read and write properly. So we started English classes for them, where we were paying special teachers to do evening classes for those children, for those youth. And we had to look for skills. So we online, one of our staff was very good with doing decorations and all for weddings. So I asked her to look for card making, and she learned online, and then she taught these deaf youth how to make these cards. And that's how the card project came into being. It was as livelihood support for the deaf people. And then after that,
Wonderful.
we've done deaf conferences and all that, and now they're much better organized, and many of them are in livelihoods. Some of them making them themselves and are selling it as well.
What a great initiative and what a great start to those people to earn a livelihood, as you say. Now, another great initiative taken by your organization was the health program initiative. What was the need for this health program, and why did F.R.I.E.N.D need to take this initiative as opposed to the government of the day providing such a service?
So 2010, we started this trial in 2010. 2010, 2011, the Pacific Forum leaders declared the Fiji and the Pacific in NCD crisis. And each year, it's the same headline. If you'll see the papers of the last few months, 80% of our deaths are, due to NCDs. It's the same narrative for the last 10 years, but somehow or the other we get surprised every time. So the last 10 years, we've been hearing the same narrative that 80%, now it's said 84% of our deaths, all our deaths, anybody dies, most likely 8 out of 10, it is one of the non-communicable diseases. And we were seeing in the community, when we started doing work in the community, now it's much more visible. If you go to communities, you will find 8 to 10 people with, limping or struggling to walk because of amputations or struggle. It's a very visible thing now, which wasn't there 30 years ago. And When we started talking to Ministry of Health said the reason of the disability is because most people come to us too late. There's no screening. So we started a screening program. We started, we'll go to communities and we'll just screen people for diabetes and hypertension, and whoever needed. Then we were discovering cases, and then we had medication available. So we had doctors and nurses doing that. Then one of the reasons you'll see our middle name is integrated is because you can't work in isolation. Now, we can do income generation, get somebody to make $500 a week. If they're buying all bad food that's causing them diabetes, we haven't done a favor. So that's why our livelihood goes with a gardening program, food security program, health program, to create a holistic developmental programs in the communities. And health was a challenge and continues to be a challenge in the communities. And we're seeing far worse situation right now in terms of disabilities. We have 3 disabilities a day due to amputations. So we have at least 3 amputations a day at the moment. And sadly, once these people's legs are cut or somebody has had a stroke, they go into the community. They don't have the money to come back to hospitals. So somebody in Bakumbuli for them to come into town, they'll need $70 carrier fare to come into town.
Right.
Our bus services are not disabled friendly for people to hop on a bus and come into town. And so these people have no access to mobility aid, and that's why Alan, when he's going around giving groceries, he constantly sees people with wheelchair needs and mobility aid need, and he's constantly working with us on that. So there's nowhere you can call and say, I need a mobility aid. There's nowhere, a lot of, and sadly also in the disability data, you'll see variance 13%, I think Fiji government says. One of the UNDP reports I saw 15% people living with disabilities in Fiji. That disability data does not include the amputees. For some reason, the disability definition does not include people living with disabilities due to NCTs. So most people are not able to access services for disability. So our health program is very focused on diabetic, hypertensives, because we know Cancer Society is doing cancer, so we refer cancer patients to them. We've had cancer societies struggling with getting some drugs in for chemotherapy and all, which we help them do. But yeah, sorry to take it such a long, but that's our focus for the health program, diabetes and hypertension.
Sashi, no apologies needed, because I think what you're saying today deserves airspace. We got to listen to what's happening on the ground level. And what you're saying is from the horse's mouth. You're there. You're on ground zero. Now, I understand that your health program has evolved into the SMILE program, Sustainable Medicine Improving Lives Through Empowerment, SMILE. So I'll say that with a smile. Now, what does SMILE entail, and what do you do with this program?
Right. So the reason we're calling it sustainable medicine is that it's not only about medication. It is about people looking after their health, so changing diets, physical activity, a whole community looking after the sick. So our team goes and does diabetes and hypertension screening. We provide medication. We provide mobility aid. We organize exercise programs. We help them with setup of their gardens. So it's a whole holistic, sustainable medicine approach in the communities.
All right, and it seems that from a very, very humble beginning, F.R.I.E.N.D has just grown from strength to strength. I understand that one of your biggest projects was the European Union-funded GROW initiative. How did this come about, and what was the GROW initiative?
That was an alternative livelihoods to sugar program that European Union had advertised. So there is a call for proposal and you apply, and we were very blessed to get it. That was one of our first large grants. We've all known that sugar price will collapse, and that was our preparation for farmers. So we looked at all the things that farmers could do for livelihood. And using that funding, we were able to set up bee farming for 200 farmers. we were able to set up poultry for, say, 500 farmers, both in Banwalevu and Bitilevu. But the way we did poultry, for example, is you will see to run poultry, people buy feed. 15 years ago, nobody was buying feed when our forefathers were doing poultry. And much of the cost actually goes into buying feed. So when we were doing poultry, we were also asking people to grow feed. We were giving them feed mill to make the feed so that it was a sustainable kind of income. And same thing with bee farm we had started. We started a lot of food processing training, which you are seeing as our products. So, the herbal teas, the lemongrass and all that we used to drink, and now it can be turned into a product. The sad thing with that product was that FSC, at that time, the chairperson was very critical of this program. And we often used to see in letters to the editor saying, oh, Sashi is going to solve the sugarcane problem with chutney making. And there was a lot of incentives for farmers not to go diversify into alternative livelihoods because there were incentives for them to keep expanding on sugar. And there was money and loans being provided, which many of the farmers, Indo farmers, did actually. But we found more ethnic Fijians who had picked up a lot of this livelihood support program. And with that money, it again allowed me to travel pretty much around Vitilevu and Banwalevu in the sugar sector and listen to people and continue to provide the support with the livelihood alternative program.
Brilliant. Now, one of our viewers, Jacinta Herman from Auckland, New Zealand, has asked if you could please name a few of your products
Oh.
that they can buy in the supermarkets in Auckland.
So we have Friends Fiji Sal, tamarind chutney, and chili pickle. These are the three, very hit products. We have sweet mango chutney and mango pickle and lime pickle, things that our ancestors knew very well, doesn't need any preservatives or additives. And now we also have gluten-free flours. So all the root crop flours, you'll find plantain flour, uto flour, breadfruit, cassava flour that our communities are making. Also, we're doing a range of herbal teas that our ancestors used to drink, like herbal lemongrass, tamole, tulsi tea, rosella, the kattavaji ke fool, that rosella, that
Yes,
red.
yes.
So a lot of that is now packed from the communities, and rather it's bought from the communities, processed and packed in our production facility, and it's available throughout the outlets.
What a great array of products you have, and I just hope that people will support your organization and buy those products. Now, I could be wrong here. I could be totally off track, but I believe you then moved forward and established the Friend Village. Where is this Friend Village? What happens there? And is it still around? I mean, what is the Friend Village?
The whole idea of Friend Village is it's not a village. It was purchase of our own property, which we did. So we've got a 5-acre property. The dream there is and we have multiple facilities. So we have an office, we have a medical facility there where we actually also do medical work, and we have a production facility where we make all these products, and then there's a training facility, and the newest addition is the restaurant. Of course, the dream is we'll have more sustainable. We have organic gardens, composting. We'd like to develop some staff quarters and retreat center and all that, but all that because of budgets is on hold. And since I mentioned restaurant, Tukuni is the restaurant we launched about a few years ago. I'm losing track of time because of the pandemic. In 2017, we launched that. And the Tukuni restaurant is all about local traditional foods. So there you will come and find satwa, the 7 grain, and the food the way our ancestors used to make, both Indo ancestors, and their beautiful charcoal foods. So in the Indian tradition, we used to do charcoal bacon and charcoal karela and things to do make chokha. But also in Fijian tradition, they do beautiful, beautiful charcoal fish, charcoal kai, charcoal breadfruit. So that sort of food, which was without frying, without heavy oil, without a lot of the NCD challenges that we're seeing currently. So, when you tell people to go on a diet or eat healthy, it's healthy, so nobody wants to eat it. But now we present the same food in a very glamorous way, and people are embracing these traditional foods in a different way. Because in 80 something, when the first step survey was done by Ministry of Health, we are told that indigenous people did not have diabetes in 83, not too long ago, and their food was a healthier version of the food that we eat today. So we're trying to bring back a lot of those traditional foods through this restaurant. So that's all in one property, and that is the Fiji, the F.R.I.E.N.D village.
And pray do tell, where is this Tukuni restaurant? Tukuni, is it Tukuni?
Tukuni. Tukuni is storytelling. The name was given
Yes.
by an indigenous person who said, if you're setting this restaurant, please, our doctor actually was working with us. He said, please name this Tukuni because it is about storytelling. It is between Bai and Lotoka. It's 15 kilometers from Lotoka in a place called Tuvu. Actually, that's also where I grew up, incidentally.
We had some land in Tuvu. I know exactly where Tuvu is. So
Okay.
brings back a lot of memories. And I would suggest to all people overseas who do travel to Fiji from Lotoka, 15 kilometers away, nice bus ride, could be a nice car ride, even a taxi ride. Go and visit the Tukini restaurant and try out those charcoal foods, buy some chutney. It's your way of contributing to this very, very worthy NGO. You are watching Sashi Singh's Talking Point, the Thinking People's program. We ask the questions that Fijians want answers to, Fijians deserve to know. This afternoon, I'm privileged to be talking about F.R.I.E.N.D, the NGO in Fiji that is doing incredible work. Please share the link on your own timeline so that you may include your family and friends in this broadcast. And I remind you that a full recording of this broadcast can be seen later on Facebook, episodes 1 to this episode, episode 12, or you could go to YouTube and watch the entire series, including today's episode as well. Now, Sashi, to successfully run any organization, be it an NGO, be it a corporate organization, one needs to have available funds. How or where does F.R.I.E.N.D get its fundings from?
We write proposals depending on the interventions that we want to do, and we've had, like you had mentioned, the EU fund that ended. We had another round of EU funds for community governance that has ended now as well. Much of our funds has been coming from Australia and New Zealand. Smaller grants, like for example, through Irish Fund, we are doing single moms income generation programs right now. So there are lots of small funds that we constantly apply for different programs. But remember, we are not co-funded. In the olden days, they used to fund salaries and everything from a donor. The whole so the organization's admin and everything could be run. Now it's very programmatic. So whatever the expenses for the program is, we only get that for the actual programming. So our income generation arm is very useful. Our restaurant is very useful in helping us raise funds. But one of the things that Richard did, Richard Naidu, during the pandemic, because he was very aware of what was happening, I remember he did a bit of a Facebook post on his page about fundraising. And last year, and during the pandemic, we received something like $250,000 citizen funding. And that was the first ever we received a massive funding, or rather donations. And it was very sweet. We saw in bank statement a $15, somebody standing in a bank line and depositing to, of course, up to $10,000 people had donated. And that money, dollar to dollar, went for food. We didn't use it for admin, salary, transport, nothing. For dollar to dollar, any donation that went for specifically for food. And you also know that when Professor Brijlal passed away, his family decided that any donation in terms of flowers, people could donate to us, and that came to F.R.I.E.N.D. And when the floods happened in Nandi recently, we used some of these funds to do that. So during the pandemic, when the money came in, it was directly used for pandemic food, because there was no funding. We didn't expect the pandemic to hit the way it did, and people needed food and medication. So we needed money to mobilize. And whatever generosity we received from the people, we made sure it went to the ground pretty rapidly.
I'll give you an opportunity towards the end of the program to give me your bank account number or to share that. And people, out of the generosity of their hearts, if they want to donate, I'm sure they would love to, and we'll discuss that towards the end of the program. But at this juncture, let me ask you: is there any government funding at all from the government of Fiji towards an organization? I see your smile. I know where this is going to, but it's a straightforward question, Sashi. Is the government of Fiji giving any sort of support to an organization like yours?
No.
Okay. All right. Let's move on. That's why you're an NGO, I guess. Uh, Now, mobilization of human resources at the best of times can be a logistical nightmare. Now, how do you mobilize your team in times of emergency? Recently, we've had the floods, and then obviously you've mentioned the pandemic as well.
Mm.
Mobilization, how do you work that out?
It's never easy. And the people I tell to that our organization staff did not get COVID the entire 3 rounds we've had, even though we're in front lines, people are surprised about it. Because most of our colleagues in other NGOs and even government ministry went down. So how did it work? Initial one where we were requested for food from the government itself, Ministry of Health and the Commissioner's Office had asked us for food for families that were put in isolation the first round, the first time it happened, and then the 200 families. At that time, we didn't know enough about this disease, so we discussed at the staff level, and I didn't want to put staff at risk, so I did that round. So I personally went with the Commissioner and Ministry of Health and organized the food. I delivered the food to the families that they wanted. What it allows us as to do as leadership is look at all the gaps, all the risks, and so on. So initially, even when Winston happened, as management team, we would go out first to figure out what are the pitfalls, and then we work with the team to develop that. So, for example, one of the things we'll find is that the staff would go looking for food. So when we did the multiple teams, we asked team, "This is the risk. Is do you want to do that?" So when the staff agreed, yes, these were the people who wanted to do, for example, the COVID response food, we had to develop a protocol that it had to be dropped at the gate. We didn't want staff to come into anybody who potentially had the disease or even pass it to them. So we'll organize the food. They'll come and eat in a clean place, and then they'll mask up, double mask and face shield. We provided resources. They'll go distribute, come back, unmask, breathe. And we had created clean spaces for them. They'll have lunch, and then they'll go out again. But there were very strict rules even within the team. Like somebody would sit in front, the second person will sit at the back. Like we maintained the distances. We made sure that everybody was protected as much as we could in terms of resources. And that happens whether it's pandemic or floods. Normally in a cyclone situation, we always go ahead of the team and assess all the risks that the team may have to go to. We are very blessed through that EU funding that you mentioned earlier. We have had 2 3-ton trucks, and we have 2 4-wheel drive vehicles that goes pretty much everywhere. So once the team is mobilized, we've been doing it for 20 years. Any natural disaster, we move. So we have protocols and systems, and it's easy for us to move. And when the flood happens, now when a heavy rainfall is predicted, and it's already showing on the map where would be the rainfall and all that, we know which rivers are there, we know which communities live by the rivers which will get flooded. I mean, it's not rocket science. It's been happening for decades. So we immediately start preparing. We always have some stocks of certain things that we need. But also for food, for example, for Nandi, I had already we had taken quotations and all that, and we had food as a backup because we know things will happen, and this would be our first response. So we make sure we have stocks, we make sure we have staff backup who are safe and healthy, and the transport and things are pre-prepared before, when the warning hits.
Sashi, let me just backtrack a little bit. You started off by answering that you were contacted by the commissioner's office. Correct? You said that?
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
Now, the fact of the matter is that here we have a government arm contacting you, the NGO, to go and distribute food. I find that absolutely, it's a crying shame. And then the other thing is, I've noticed a recent trend, and this is my opinion. People don't have to agree with me, but I'm entitled to my opinion. I find it absolutely staggering that here, as the head of an NGO, you look at weather maps, you look at the predictability, you look at areas where it's going to pour, and you strategize and you plan ahead. Whereas we have a cyclone or a flooding that takes over Fiji, and people are still sitting on their backsides, not ready to do what they're supposed to be doing. That is a really, really sad state of affairs in Fiji. Why can't the government mobilize themselves? Or are you not going to answer that? And I'll respect that.
I can't answer on behalf of the government because I don't know. But I think when the pandemic had hit, um, first case where there were 35 people in a small funeral place. Now, the commissioner's office and the DU's office do not have food just like that. And then very quickly, there were like 200 families in isolation. And where would people call? They were asking Ministry of Health to provide that food. And Ministry of Health was, of course, asking the commissioner because commissioner is the prime minister for the Western Division or the administrative head. And at that time, there were no resources mobilized. I think everybody was too much in a shock. And because during that pandemic, remember, we went into a lockdown. And
Yes.
because we went into lockdown, within the first week, people who were largely in informal sector had no food in their house. People here are hand to mouth, and we shop for week to week. So many people had no food in their homes, and we had already worked and talked to other NGOs. I talked to Crisis Center and a few others, where we're able to get funds and mobilize for food, and we're distributing food to people who are desperately in need for food and baby milk and things in their homes. So the commissioner's office knew that we had food. And here were people in isolation for more than 5 days, 8 days. And that in those days, I think the quarantine period was 14 days and there was no food. So naturally they asked us, well, I'm sure they would have asked their own system. And when they asked us, we couldn't say no for, initially we said, well, government should mobilize resource, but then these were people suffering at the end of the day, and we could not, that's not the time we can say, you go and find your own resource or this and that. People are suffering, we had to move.
Great answer. Now, I have some other interesting government related questions to follow. But my question right now is, does F.R.I.E.N.D as an NGO, do you have to report to any government agency, or can you just act totally independently as an NGO?
During a disaster, we are required by an act to report. So, for example, when TC Winston happened or any disaster happens, they would be, in the olden days, NDMO. Or nowadays, before olden days, it was DISMAC, now it's NDMO. There'll be tons of meetings, whole day meetings, lots of planning meetings, lots of reporting meetings. So we normally get a template which is available, and the teams we actually upload. And during the pandemic, we had a few floods and cyclones where we kept reporting the food that was going out and so on. So we do that. Now, times like TC Winston, when we had to travel to Reki, we'd leave here 7 in the morning, we'll arrive there like 10:30 at times, we'll leave late into the night and come back. We did not want to sit and have, be in the meetings. So we would just call the planning officer or the commissioner and say, this is what we're doing, and on this particular day. Government generally says we don't want replication, so you must tell us what you're doing. So we inform them.
All right, now let me move our discussion to some major areas of concern. You are in that unique position, Sashi, where you are what I term on ground zero, and you see firsthand many, many of society's ills. Now, can you share a story or two with us in terms of the real aspects of poverty? I know you've shared one or two stories, but if I asked you, what is a real horrific story of the current poverty level in Fiji, what would you describe? How would you describe that?
Where families are not able to feed their children or provide medication to their families is very painful to see. We've seen that people who had homes can't afford mortgages. So if there is a permanent home and we found, like, somebody, an elder mother, maybe disabled, living in a small shack, like that was like the house where the children had moved off, many of those children have come back, and we are seeing 18, 20, 35 people in a small space, crowded space, where, because they can't afford to pay rent, they can't afford to pay mortgage, they have lost their dignity. Food is a struggle. Many people had gone back into gardens, but you'll see this year we've had massive floods and we still have rains. So in the Western Division, while Nandi was more hit by the pandemic, it's been hit by floods, and then Naba has been, entire Western Division has been hit by floods. So people who are reliant on, say, their own farming and food, they can't, they have nothing left, or massive damages. When the weather is like this, it's dry right now and it's been raining, then people can't go to the sea for fish, for fishing. So as much as people, and even like when we do work in Yes Hours, we've seen everybody has lost their job. Yes, they have the ocean, but it's not only food people need. People need medication, especially with the high number of diabetes and hypertension that we're seeing. We are seeing very, very sad cases. And I'll tell you, my Christmas was pretty bad because prior to those 2 weeks, the team was, fully on the ground, and we were hearing stories on a daily basis. We have seen, like I said, much more disabilities now in Nandi in particular, but overall we're seeing much more young disabilities due to diabetes and so on. We seeing we had seen cases, actual cases, where by the time we got the calls, there was no food or there was no milk for babies. So people feeding coconut water, just plain water, and maybe boiled bhaji or something, and a neighbor calling us and saying, there is a real situation here and you need to provide food. Or in one case, a landowner called us, a landlord called us, and the guy who had very small children had lost both his legs to amputation recently. And now he'll never be able to get his legs or job back. And how does he even survive his family? So there are constant painful stories we deal with. And we also struggle, like, we do take people's consent before putting photos on social media, but some people who've lived a very dignified life and all of a sudden they have no dignity. So we, as much as we want to create awareness on poverty, it's a struggle. How do you put these faces of poverty on social media? And they are very willing. Many of them have said, we want our stories told. But I think of long term and the impact it'll have on their families and so on. And it's a struggle we are having constantly inside our office on how much do we publicize about some of these very painful things we're seeing on the ground.
Now, if poverty and unemployment, if there are a real problem in Fiji, and they are, then it follows that affordable housing should also, I think, be a major problem as well. What
Yes.
problems have you come across that you can highlight to us today with regards to the community and the issue of affordable housing or lack thereof?
So many people who were paying mortgages have struggled to pay, and it's been 2.5 years. So some banks had given slack, but some banks are no longer doing that. People cannot afford rent. That's why they're moving back into wherever there's one family, a very, very sad situation, but now thankfully they're making money. She's doing some beautiful work that she's sending to diaspora. Couldn't afford rent, asked for the landowner to give her a piece of land, and that they'll do the work on the farm, and they've built a very small shack. So somebody was doing nice 3-bedroom, they could afford, husband and wife were working, all of a sudden they are in a shack somewhere, at least providing for their family. But what's sad is that the housing, I'll tell you, how there's housing, the Ministry of Housing, those single room housing that's
Yes.
available.
The low cost housing.
It used to
Yes,
be $5 a week rent that went up to $20 a week rent. And
yes.
in Simla, there are some new housing blocks that have been made, and those houses have been priced at $100 a week. These are single rooms with toilet, shower, and this was made for poor people, and a lot of poor people cannot afford that. Also, sadly, people who are living in housing have been banned from doing any business. So these are single mothers, already very, very people in a very difficult situation living in these homes. If they plant vegetables, their vegetables are pulled out.
What?
If, yes, and if they are trying, they've been banned from doing any sort of business from housing. So they can't sew and sell. They can't, do little canteens and things. That's how bad it is. So even, I mean, so these are the people living in housing, needing income generation. And I was told that in Braywanga, it's the same. The house prices have gone up. So where do poor people go?
Wow. I mean, to just imagine sitting where I am here today in Sydney, to just imagine that a poor family's been given a single room house, etc., and if they do some subsistence, vegetable gardening, etc., plants are pulled out. That
Yes,
is like living in a communist world or a dictatorship place. Just boggles the mind indeed. Now, coupled with poverty, unemployment, housing, I'm sure you've come across an ever rapidly rising situation of squatter settlements. Is that a reality?
that has been increasing. And in the squatters where they were, say, a nuclear family, now many families are joining that family. So there is overcrowding that we are seeing in squatters.
And in terms of squatter settlements, my question is there a demarcation along ethnic lines, or uh, the times in Fiji now, they're so bad that Indians and Fijians alike all, you know, in times of hardship, those who can't afford it, go towards squatter settlements? What's
Yes,
the ethnic divide?
both ethnic groups. We know that in Toke people are about 64%, I think, and Indo people are around 30%, 33%. So that's what's the mix that we are seeing. So we are seeing more Toke people, and in Nandi, there's a rapid increase in street people now. Lotoka has the problem, but in Nandi now there's feeding programs in town on certain days of a week because there's so many more people in Nandi on streets that was never seen before.
Now, let me address with you the high cost of living. The price of food items and fuel have gone up so drastically. And just this week, we've heard about the cost of flour going up. How does the average person, or the person below the average income level, how do they manage their lives in terms of this high cost of living?
When we do listening, I remember even the pandemic, and I guess it happens all the time because we saw that even in Winston. Generally, elders say that we make sure our children get fed, and we miss a meal and we'll have one meal a day. I remember one of the boys telling me even now that it's better to wake up late. So if you wake up, say 10 or 11, then the whole family, so then it's like during the pandemic in particular, then you miss the breakfast, then you have like sort of a late meal. People miss meals. And I don't know if you're aware, 80%, our malnutrition rate is very high. Yeah? So we have 80% of children below the age of 2 who are anemic. And if they don't have enough blood in the body and in the brain, they're not fully developing. But 80% of our children below the age of 2 are anemic. 50% of our children in preschool are anemic. And that is a national nutrition data statistics. What people tend to do is buy noodles, so you buy noodles 4 5 packs, and something, a little bit of this and a little bit of that, and that becomes a meal. So people are choosing the cheapest that's available in the outlets, and that's destroying our health in terms of the malnutrition that I just mentioned, but also the NCDs. So it's not the easiest of times for people.
Now, Sashi, your organization plays a pivotal role under your SMILE program, where your volunteer doctors and nurses conduct regular NCD clinics in very poor and remote communities. Now, do the people that you meet speak of the health services in Fiji? Are things so bad that an NGO like yours has to provide such critical medical services?
Actually, we our doctors are not volunteer. We pay for the doctors
Oh,
and the nurses. Yeah, we have full-time staff in doctors, nurses, and physiotherapists who go out and do the screening and provide medication. I think the we've been hearing a lot of enough cases there about Ministry of Health, so I won't go too much into it. But I think the hospital or the ministry team has been doing a lot and stretching themselves to the hilt in just dealing with the pandemic. With the breakdown in infrastructure and the resources and the limited resources they have, if you look at that, it'll be interesting for you to look at the budgets that are available to Ministry of Health prior to pandemic budget and during the pandemic budget. With the limited budgets they have received, how on earth do they do more than what they're already doing? I think they have done really well and they've been pushing themselves so much to make sure that at least the pandemic was managed, the leptospirosis is managed. It's like hand to mouth on a daily basis because they need resources and equipment and backup and all that sort of thing to be able to do more.
well, it sounds so depressing as we hear you talk of the dire need for services in Fiji. Everyday problems like a total breakdown in infrastructure, where electricity and water services are disrupted nearly on a daily basis, where health services leave a lot to desire, where the very high cost of living is a daily worry to people. Are these issues ever raised with you and your team when you are on the field, or people, because of a lack of dignity or self respect, they just humbly take what you give them and they don't discuss their problems?
No, we do proper listening conversations. So even in a business session, when we sort of do a circle and we say how you're feeling, what are the challenges. We are constantly doing listening. So any program, like business program or whatever program we run, we spend some time and not check how you're feeling and what's happening, because that helps us develop interventions. Our programs are just not dropped from the sky. We constantly are developing interventions and we take it to the donors and say this is the program needed and why. For example, the livelihoods projects that we're doing now, it was designed and developed 3 years ago, 2.5 years ago, in the first pandemic. Now, we did not take into account all the other things that will happen. So, listening is a key part of our work, and people are telling us, and that's why we're providing this. We know, and even now, when the teams are going out, medication is a challenge for many people who come from rural areas and cannot access medication, or they have only 1 week supply from the government pharmacy because it's not available, and they have no affordability to go to a private pharmacy to get it. So we know, and that's why we are trying to do more to make sure that people have access to what's needed for them.
Hats
Now,
off to you. Sorry, go on.
one thing that saddens me is that the elders of our community have built the nation. We are standing here because the seniors have done what they have done. And at an older age, people are having stroke and diabetes, and are in a place in life where they need care, they need resources. They have contributed to the nation, and that's it. It's very heartbreaking when you see the seniors suffering the way they do on the ground.
Sashi, I take my hat off to you. You've said that you, your organization, your team, you actually listen. Now, that's an art which is very seldom, it's a forgotten art. But in times of people's needs, like I said, you listen. But let me ask you this question, and I don't know what your answer is going to be. Do you think the powers that be, do you think the government of the day has stopped listening to the people?
See, our people talk in different languages. For example, if you go to somewhere, they'll generally say things that that they'll think that you want to hear. Listening and deep listening needs trust. So You simply cannot swoop into a community and say, oh, today we are here to listen to you and you tell us your problems. You have to go and be able to develop the trust to be able to listen. And I think that's why in the government machinery, there's a machinery, there's at the district level and all that level, and the voices need to be heard from those, and then it goes up. And of course, during the pandemic, we did not see a lot of government ministers out listening to people. That time, basically, PS was in front, and we didn't see much of the government at all. And listening in those kind of times is very important, because that's the time people are crying out. So I don't, at the moment, it seems people are running around, government is running around, budget consultations, there's a lot going on in terms of listening. But the quality of listening, I'm not so sure how things are going, because I haven't attended any one of those. I'll give you one very short, small example. When we did the TC Winston,
Yes.
when one of the worst cyclones we were hit with, when we went into the communities, we never go empty-handed for assessment. Of course, we know people will need food and clothes. So we take it while we do assessments. And when we were going in village by village, I met some elders. And he asked us, do you really want to know what we need? So when we asked them, what do you need? He said, the first thing we need is shelter. Food and things, even if we don't eat, they see we'll manage. We need shelter. And we said, how do we do shelter? Because there were a lot of tents and things going on. They're saying in the rain, the tents are leaking. The wind, it's very difficult to be in the tents. We need a solid roof on our head. And how does it happen? He said, can you make sure that you can give a 6 roofing iron to just, they do this? We have a lot of timber. We have our mahogany forest, and we'll collect debris for the side of the roof. So what do you need? We need chainsaws. And he told me specifically the types of chainsaws they needed. We need Husqvarna, this size, it'll cost you $2,500. I went quiet, because that's not the disaster response I knew donors will give. And I said, I cannot promise you, but I'll talk. So I came back and asked corporate friends, and one of our lawyer friends actually gave 3 chainsaws immediately. And we were able to then mobilize chainsaws. And then we were able to mobilize the communities to find who could handle the chainsaw, because it's a safety issue. And then they cut the timber, and we provided the roofing iron. Again, we went to the donors to explain. So that's what I mean by listening. You have to really understand the problem. Whereas what they were getting was more and more wash kits, this kits, that kits, whatever the disaster organizations think and donor organizations think is relevant and has worked in other parts of the world. That's what they were getting, loads and loads of it. And sadly, so now we have a cluster system in disaster planning and management. And there is a bidding. So the different clusters ask for funding, and most funding went into WASH cluster. WASH is about water and sanitation. Where the cyclone had hit, the Koratumbu area, they had good water supply from their own streams and so on, clean water. And months later we went, there were flush toilets standing, but no houses. So housing cluster didn't get enough funding, and the WASH cluster got more funding, and there were toilets, and we were going into the communities and they're saying, people have come and built toilets for us, but we don't have houses. So not listening can result in people pushing their own agendas instead of actually meeting the needs of the people.
Now, we've been talking of issues that concern people on a daily basis. How do these issues affect women? Because after all, they are the ones that perform the very important role of mother, wife, homemaker. They mostly control the budget of the family, and they run the whole household, so to say. Do women ever speak of the difficulties they face, or is it just a common problem all over, all alike?
No, we do special listening. Like I said earlier with Shamima, we've done like listening by listening, we mean we provided transportation to informal sector women, got them in a room, just spend the day, listening. We had structured program to bring out some of these issues. And then we had women from formal sector, again taken to a hotel. We provided transport and food just to make sure that we were listening to them, because we were also worried about the mental health issues that are issue right now. Yes, we've seen women burdened with more challenges. We've seen men walking out on them. I guess when a child cries, then a mother cannot sit back and say, well, somebody will provide. They have to get out there and do what's needed. So, yes, the challenge is there, and we are seeing more women health issues because they are the last ones to get to the hospital. And burdens, we make a special focus in just listening to women. Just recently, a couple of days ago, we had single mothers session where we listen to them, their issues, how can we support them with their livelihoods and so on. So their issues are, men when they talk. I remember one of the sessions we had with the people, and it was also very interesting where we talked about anything they wanted to share, and this man said, I have nothing to share. I have nothing to share. But my children ask me, why don't you go to job anymore? My children come to me and I can't give them, bongo and things that I used to be able to give them before. I have nothing to share. But then he kept sharing. I think men generally probably would, when they come out, they not used to sharing, their heart's issues. Whereas with women, we've been able to learn about the issues of being able to provide food packs for children, struggle with fees, struggle with transport, medication, housing. And both men and women, I think, going in extreme challenges in being able to meet the needs they do. One of the things we have found constantly from both men and women is the difficulty in keeping relationships together in these very challenging times. There's crowd, there's conflicts, there's challenge of not being able to provide for each other. So not an easy time.
Then, with all of these things put together, what would the mental state of the community be?
There are much more conflicts. Much
Depression, things like depression and
is something it's quite common, and because of that, the violence we are seeing in the communities, you've been hearing from Shamima, the violence has gone up. But yeah, depression is something that we are seeing quite a bit.
Now, Sashi, in your line of work, I'm sure you've had many, many interactions with the media. You were a former journalist, from promoting your organization's activities to highlighting matters of importance for the underprivileged. Now, I have something like a three-in-one question, if I may. Number one, in your view, how effective has the media been in recent years in highlighting the socio-economic factors and issues impacting the ordinary citizens, including those living in poverty?
I think media tries. You'll see often media is on the ground and tries to put some of the stories, but it's not the easiest of environments. But also, because of the pandemic, I think there have been job cuts, and because of social media, there are advertisement cuts and so on. So even for media to remain in mainstream and be able to do these stories hasn't been easy. But I think media has been responsive. Much more can be done. I mean, I myself have been thinking, how do you raise awareness on the amount of poverty on the ground? And I've been talking to different media about it. It's not easy. And I don't know what sort of resources they have allocated to be able to do much more of the listening from the ground.
Now, part two of, and maybe three of that question is, do you think there are barriers faced by the media in terms of perhaps sanctions or worries that the media has in terms of openly highlighting the real situation on the ground? And if the answer to that is yes, then what would those barriers be?
I think one of the barriers is that people may not want to talk. We've had cases where people will say, please don't put my story. What if something happens to my family? Or especially if people go to a hospital or people go to a place where they have had challenges, what would be the implications? How would I be perceived? My family will tell me off if I say that I don't have food in the house. So it's not the easiest of times where, because now we are social media connected and people worry about the perception they put out there for their own families. So I think that would be one of the barriers. But I don't think media would be very restricted in talking about the poverty situation, because situation is on the ground. And it's, well, unless they are checking government policies and resources.
Okay. Now, I've read that Friend has also expanded to the Northern Division. Why was there a need to expand to the Northern Division, if I may ask you, please?
North has always been a concern for me personally, though we've actually reduced our operations in North since the pandemic because we couldn't put resources in both places. When Nandi happened, we had to mobilize our administrative resources here and put Lambasa on hold because Vanwalevu has been surviving and will continue to survive. But the way we operating in Vanwalevu is, Vanwalevu has so many issues and concerns. Transportation to mainland, markets for their products. You've seen, batiri go up, pineapple go up. So many things are developed there, but then there's no market, no strong sense of income. They have to struggle much more for scholarship. And if people came to the, say, mainland for either job or universities, the housing and expenses, it's not the easiest. So Vanwalevu and Maritime are our concern. And that's why we continue to develop more products. You'll see we do more dried fruits, desiccated coconut, flour that can stay in case the boat doesn't come, in case the transportation is an issue. Because farmers in Vanwalevu, when they're doing fresh and they have no export or no boat systems and so on, and with the cane going down, income generation is, and basically income, and with income, then the health and everything else that they need to afford is much bigger challenge for both Vanwalevu and Maritime.
Now, how bad are things in the Northern Division?
To be honest, the last I went there was TC Anna, and I haven't focused that much on the north. We've been so focused on Nandi. TC Anna was last year, January, February, sometime early last year, when they had seen about, in a decade, one of the worst floods in Lambasa town. So after TC Yasa, there was a lot of hoopla about TC Yasa, where Bua and other areas were affected and resources were put there. And then Anna happened, and there was a massive flooding in town. And then immediately pandemic happened. So we moved there with the TISI Sangam and provided about 1,000 plus food packs. And we have been in touch with the people there, and we're trying to organize more livelihood opportunities there. But I think, considering, and I may be wrong, and Vanwalevu people may be really angry with me if I say this, but at least people who are on the farm, and if they're not very badly affected by floods currently, they probably have more food to eat than some of the people who are struggling with unemployment in Nandi and Lotoka. Though they do need assistance. Vanwalevu would remain a very special part of our work going forward.
Now, where do you get your materials from, be it food, medicine? You mentioned baby's milk, toiletries, health items. How do you get all of these things? How do you organize it?
We follow protocol, so we do quotations and so on, and most of the things are available in Fiji. We've got baby milk in here, and it's expensive. That's why people can't afford it. Lactogen is the cheapest milk we give, which is a $9 packet of, I think, 200 grams or something. So our baby may need, depending on the toddler or the smaller babies, may need 3 to 4 packets. So we try and source that internally, and we stock it. So when babies are requiring that, we've actually even supplied baby milk to maternity wards when mothers were stuck during the pandemic. Adult diapers to the what do you call those, the medical facilities that were put up at that particular time, St. Giles, old people's homes, and of course the disabled. So we constantly look for money to find resources to have adult diapers, mobility aid. These and some of these things, if they are not funded, we are constantly looking for resources, and we get donations for milk and food. We're lucky that FMF donates us at least a ton of rice and a ton of flour every month, and that goes to the homes. The children's home that used to live a lot on donation, and donation is very poor right now because of the economic situation, and the senior citizen home, so that goes there. But then we budget for food. We actually provide in the 2 months, January, February, I think we provided something like 2,700 food packs. So we know the averages, and we negotiate and make sure we have food in stock for this.
But apart from what little donation you get, most of the stuff is purchased by Friend.
Yes, we purchase and we stock up. We make sure.
Wow. You are watching Sashi Singh's Talking Point on Facebook Live, and our chief guest this afternoon giving us an enlightening portrayal of things in Fiji is Miss Sashi Kiran, founder and CEO of Friend. Sashi, I can promise you, you told me that the program shouldn't run too long. Not long to go now. We're on the home stretch. Let me share something that might be a little unpleasant for you, but I'd like your comments on this. Let me share a recent newspaper headline with you. The headline read, and I quote, "If Sashi Kiran wants to do humanitarian work, then everything must go through the DOs." Now, this statement is attributed to the Minister for Disaster Management, Inia Seruiratu. What was the reason for such an attack by you on the minister, by the minister?
Actually, I have no idea why he did that. From what I understand is, and every time opposition raises an issue, even the first time we were attacked, the opposition had said, "Government, are you willing to work with the NGOs?" And at that time, the Attorney General turned around and said, "We know the elephant in the room is Friend. It's Friend that every opposition is talking about." So I don't know why and what the attack was all about, because we were quite taken aback. We work very well with the Commissioner's office and the district offices on the ground. So
Well,
very
I note with interest that Minister Seruiratu said that with parliamentary privilege behind him. Now, you mentioned the Attorney General. Well, the Minister for Economy, who's also the Attorney General, actually attacked Friend and claimed that Friend was making, and I quote his words, "a lot of political mileage," end of quote, for its work, and was the only organization that the opposition kept talking about. Now, in response, Professor Biman Prasad, the leader of the National Federation Party, called that attack by the Attorney General shameful and disgraceful. How do you react? What was your reaction to the attack by the Minister for Economy?
to be honest, that was, I think, the first round of the pandemic. We were so busy, we didn't even see it.
Mm-hmm.
And by the time it was brought to our attention, there were other people defending us. So if you look at the media, we never said a word. There were lots of other people defending us. We were doing food. Lotoka Hospital had gone into lockdown. We were providing resources for Lotoka Hospital, the staffing, beds, bedding, sheets, medication for the entire Western Division at that time. Things were so bad on the ground, and our team was so stretched that the last thing we were doing was watching news or what was being said. So honestly, I don't know where it came from. We were taken aback, but we didn't
It
have
is.
that time to dwell on it.
I mean, it is absolutely shocking. I mean, when you say things are so bad on the ground level, the country's struggling, and here, yet in Parliament, you have words thrown around because the Minister for Disaster Management, he even went further and allegedly said that your organization, Friend, and I don't believe this, but he said your organization, Friend, only assists NFP supporters. Now, surely, as an NGO, you would not be guilty of such an accusation under any circumstances. What do you say to such an allegation made in Parliament? Are you supporting only NFP supporters?
If that's the case, then everybody in the evacuation center must be an NFP supporter. I was quite taken aback that is he asking every evacuee to be voting for NFP or what? Because at that time, I think when he was referring to the evac centers, that particular flooding, Tisikodi one, we provided food to, I think, somewhere around 880 packs to entire evacuation centers from Reki to Singatoka at that particular time. And we worked through the DOs. We were getting lists and we were providing food. We also provided for the flooded communities. And we cannot go and know who was affected and who was not. So we make sure that the advisory councillors give us the list and it comes through the DO's endorsement, and our staff are there with the advisory councillors. So advisory councillors are the ones saying, "Oh, Bhaiya, your house was more affected, your house is in a higher area." And some of the villages they had given, and I even went there and I said to the people, "Look, only people living in the flooded areas, if your houses are raised, So where was the time for us to discriminate again and ask, okay, which party did you vote? Was the proof that you voted for this particular party, then only we'll give it to you. So I think that was such a silly remark. And he obviously doesn't understand his own team, because advisory councils are appointed by the government. The district officers are appointed by the government. They are the ones we were working with.
Now, with all the attacks against Friend in Parliament, what is the public's perception of Friend and perhaps of you these days?
Honestly, I don't know. But what I do know is it was very heartening that a lot of people rose to defend us. Each time we were attacked in Parliament, we didn't have to go and defend ourselves until Seruratu actually said that we don't work with government. Then I had to defend our position, because our donors will think, oh, you don't work with the government. And I said to the commissioners and the DO's offices, I'm sorry, I don't want to put you guys at risk, but I have to make this statement, because we have other stakeholders as well. But each time, citizens have risen to defend us, and I think that speaks for itself. But we haven't done any survey on how people perceive us, really, because we're so busy doing what needs to be done.
Keep on doing what you are doing, because reality and truth stands out on its own. Now, what role do NGOs like yours play in the country's policy development? I mean, we've heard a lot about the review of the national minimum wage. Has Friend been consulted on this subject? And if not, do you think there is value for the government to reach out to organizations such as yours?
That's a hard one because of the timing of what's happening right now. So I'll maybe drop that here. But and I've seen some criticism of why NGOs are speaking against the policies. Now, Friend is a developmental NGO. So Red Cross would be, direct disaster response. They do, and there are organizations that do just charity. We are a developmental organization. And as a developmental organization, we have to raise issues on development. We have to lobby for policies on development. Whether it's this government, past government, new government, we'll continue to do that. So when people accuse us that you're being political because you're raising issues, that's what we are born for. That's why we are here. And the policies, we have worked on different policies with the government, NCD and health being one. We have been working with them on an ongoing basis, and a lot of those policies just go on the table in circles because of the big players involved in the processed food industry. We have been working on policies of organic, because we are very disturbed by the amount of chemicals being used, and I think its relation to NCDs. So we've actually done policy consultations for the government. We've helped draft a policy. We've worked with the Agriculture Ministry in developing cabinet paper that hasn't seen the light of the day. But that's our role. We hope that country is not always in a disaster mode. We've been in disaster mode for 2.5 years. We're doing response. But mostly we work on socio-economic and health empowerment programs, and that means we work on policies, we work on lobby, we work on legislations, as well as interventions that we develop.
Now, early last year, I was doing my research and I came across this. Early last year, your organization assisted some 3,000 students with stationery. How did you identify the need and how did you organize this?
That wasn't hard. We had an offer of a donation from one of the UN agencies, and we had specifically asked for stationery because of the floods. Post-floods, and Nandi and Ba, Reki, we took the stationery to Vanuatu, but mostly in the Western divisions. Post-pandemic, there was massive floods, and many people had said that their stationery was damaged. So we called on, actually we worked with Sangam there, TSI Sangam, and they invited all the schools to make submissions on what their needs were with the book list and all, and then we purchased it and we had it delivered. We've done that before, so not a big issue.
What a wonderful project indeed to assist students, future leaders of the country. Now, I'm going to change the subject here. I believe there was a Rewa project that you were associated with. I've actually gone back and I've watched the video of this. It was a very, very poignant ceremony. You were quoted as saying, and I quote, "I finally belong. I have always been a citizen of Fiji with all the rights and privileges that came with it. However, I remained a Vulangi, foreigner, from indenture system until the acceptance of our people into the Ethoke system of relationship through adoption by the people of Notho and Rewa. And in reply, Ratu Isoan Damundamu, the Turangani Tuinotho, said, "You belong to us, and we belong to you." Sashi, this is very powerful when you read those words, or as I've just read it out loud. What was this project about, and how did this come about?
So remember I said to you in the beginning that one of the reasons that we started F.R.I.E.N.D was also 2000 had crashed our relationship. And growing up, we've always heard Indians go back to India. That always irks, I'm sure, to any Indian citizen born in Fiji. And it always had this. Even when we have friendly fight, we used to have friendly fights in development, in conversations. And Fijians will say, "Oh, go back to India," and I'll say, "Oh, last boat, last boat." My heart and soul is, yeah, I will be the last boat. And one thing, I think, as people of Indian origin, we've always felt like we're a victim. And this is no blame on different leaders. Different leaders had done different things for our people at different times. But when I was doing the peace work, I had the opportunity to go into Fijian spaces. So the rebels in Savo during 2000, some of the friends of CRW people were outside. And I don't know if you remember, but Savo and some of the areas were very hot spots with a lot of anger. Of course, Telebu, Monoweni, Dawasamo, where the indigenous people were very angry. And we always perceived ourselves as victims, and we've always perceived the Toke people as perpetrators. And I was very angry having seen many of those things. And then there was an organization called F.R.I.E.N.D. It's an economical-based organization, and Father Frank Hoa, a Columban priest, actually started this peace process. And he invited non-Christians and people into this space. I was only one of the very few ones who actually went into that space. I was skeptical. But then I went through this whole conflict resolution, peace building process. And I was trained as a peace facilitator, and I went into some of these very hotspot indigenous areas. And when the people at that time in 2000, 2001 saw me, they were very angry. And I saw the anger and the hatred. And I've sat in since then many workshops where people had political prisoners had just come out, and very angry indigenous people in a room where I was the only Indo person in the room. And it hit me that the first one I went to, we cried throughout. Every day we cry. It was a very painful time because for the first time it hit me that the Toke people felt that they were victims and we were perpetrators. And it was, I took a lot of time to understand the position. And they felt that we didn't understand them. We were encroaching on their rights. There was a lot of fear and victimhood on their side, just like there was a lot of fear and victimhood on our side. And when we started having some deep conversations with the facilitators, I began to learn that, with the colonial powers having separated us, we remain separated. And each leadership in each of the ethnic group kept fighting for their own rights. And at no point we had come together. And I was wondering, what will happen if we'll come together as human beings? Because when I hang out with Fijians, we eat, we have same needs. We eat, we sleep, sense of belonging and all that sort of thing. So I started spending a lot of time in research on that. And that's why I said when we started doing F.R.I.E.N.D, all our programs, we made sure that ethnic groups were coming together and working together. But there was still, and we still live in silos, and our development happens in silos. You've been here. So the district office, if there's one big river that's flooded, the Indian community would be consulted separately and Fijian communities would be separate. It's not as if we're dealing with the, flooding. So you are dumping rubbish and this community down there is impacted. It's that planning still doesn't happen. So I thought, let's look at one point in history where the two ethnic groups had come together, any non-politically. And I did a lot of search and I learned a lot. And there is so many places in the Girmit era where the Fijians, the indigenous people, had provided sanctuary to our forefathers. But one thing that hit me was the Syria. When the ship wreck happened, the fourth boat was wrecked in the waters near Nasilai Reef, our people were rescued by the indigenous people, even though the narrative has not been, told enough about it. So I thought Nasilai in current times, it is in Tailevu, and that's where most people have been going. So we asked the Tailevu Provincial Council. We didn't get much feedback. If you remember the late Rokutuimbao Ratuchone Mandrai, I had a long conversation with him. And I said, our people had gone to your people had saved us. And he said, no, that in indigenous people, things are not written, but it's narrated in each ceremony. So that is not part of our narrative, but it is a part of narrative of Rewa province. And what that meant was that there was an incident that happened and boundaries have changed since then. So we continue to go to Tailevu, but in actual fact, that was the story of Rewa. So when I went to Vanimanamambale Narukupindraketi, she was in politics. I didn't want to be seen with her. She'll tell you that gladly. And it was a very difficult time, but I approached her and she said, oh, that's not my story. Go to Tuinodo. Places I'd never been, never seen. We went and approached Tuinodo. Asked a few Indians to go. And Ratuchoni had also said, who do you represent? So we did a lot of consultations. I pretty much went around talking to most Indian organizations that we wanted to do this. And when we went to Tuinodo, Turanga Tuinodo, the late Turanga Tuinodo, he was leaving for a church event. And we had taken a kamunanga, a tambua, to him. And we said, we are here to learn about the story of Syria. And he sat down and he said, oh, this is our old kamunanga. You have come to renew our old relationship. I didn't understand Fijian that well, but what I understood from that, I just could not believe. And I had to keep asking whether this is what I heard. He said, it's a very old relationship you've come to renew. Your people are buried in our land, and they belong to the land, and we belong to the land. So we belong to you, and you belong to us. It was just, we were stunned. We didn't expect it. We went just to see if there was a beginning of a common talk. And here he took the mat out of under our feet, and he said, you belong to this land. And I asked him, and he said, well, people have come, they've gone to Nasalai Reef because it's Tailevu, and nobody had actually gone for 140 years to them in search for the story. So then one thing led to the other, and we went and we said, we just want to say thank you for all you had done for our ancestors, because then we read in the history that our people the dead were buried, because when the boat was wrecked, the colonial powers took 2 days to come. So the boat was wrecked on Sunday evening, and because of miscommunication, the rescue came around Tuesday afternoon. But by Monday morning, the Northo people had started, in their small boats, had started bringing people to the shore. And there were some who had died, and some might have floated to other villages for burial as well. But while there were about 35 people, I think, buried, and 54 people had died altogether, there were about 100 who were badly injured, and they were kept in the village for a month for treatment, and then they were carried, in relay fashion to the center where the colonial powers were. Can you imagine, for a month, our people who probably looked different, no language, total language barrier, the indigenous people looked different, but they looked after our people despite all the language barrier and all, and made sure they had recovered before they were taken. And we were very, very emotional. And then I went there, and he took me to the grave and so on. So I said, we would like to do a thank you to you. And he said, don't do a thank you to me, because I also have a chief above me, and now, it has to go to the Rakutindraketi. So when we went and asked Rakutindraketi, and she's a politician, and we knew it, however it'll be seen, but the intention was different. She said, I'm about to, I'm in my old age, and Ratu is in his old age. I think it'd be nice if we consulted other chiefs. And when they consulted other chiefs, Rewa Day was coming up. And they said, come to that place and you can do a thank you. So we took as much as we could to just express our gratitude. They didn't expect it. Till the last minute, the chief said, we could not believe that something like this could happen. And everybody wept. And from then, we've developed a relationship. The late Ratu Isondamadamu has given us a Idavuti. That means a relationship that we are connected to a chief. So now we are connected to the relationship of the land. And that meant a lot to us. And I know we haven't continued to do enough work. We've done Vesa and a few other ceremonies around the country. because we did this and Winston hit. And we were barely recovering from Winston. I had broken my leg for a couple of years, I was healing, and then the pandemic hit. But there's much more work needed in terms of building our relationships. And a lot of things changed for us from then.
A lot of understanding is required, and I would say to our viewers, it's a very poignant video piece that I observed. And if you go to Google or if you go to YouTube and look for Friend and look for the Rarer Project, it's a wonderful documentary that's been produced. It's only about 37 minutes, I think. So that's something that you should look forward to. Sashi, as we come to the home stretch, you've been involved with Friend and you have this relationship with the community. Do you find there is gender bias in society when it comes to things like productivity, farming, marketing, etc.?
I think that's a fact of life. It's always been there. Um, and it's shifting. But as poverty increases and situation changes, unfortunately the gender biases also increases, because now when the job market is limited, we see more men are being employed, more women are left behind. When it talks about market and land availability, the resources go more towards the men, so that exists.
It's a fact of life, as you said, but times are changing, and I hope it does change people's perception of gender bias. Now, I understand that in the performance of its services as an NGO, Friend, I don't know whether you've been recognized at home or not, but I believe you've been recognized for your hard work and the service to the community, and you've received, Friend has received recognition. Would you like to share some of these awards or recognitions that Friend has got?
We've received multiple awards, various awards. Most recent, I think, was from WHO, World Health Organization, in our food and nutrition diversity program, where we encourage a backyard garden of diverse nutrition. But in the past, we've received Nelson Mandela Graça Machel Award for our youth program. And over the years, I think we've received more than a dozen awards for the different initiatives that we have taken. But at the end of the day, whether it's shaking hands with Prince Charles, or I've gone to the Vital Voices program and met the foreign affairs of the US. Various foreign affairs ministers. I was hosted at Bill Gates. I was there at Microsoft for 6 weeks for mentorship. There are lots of things that have happened in life, but I think those are not the things that define us really. What defines us is the values that we carry ourselves with and how much of the objectives that we have set ourselves we meet on a day-to-day basis. There was a lot of talk, and we were asked to go for the 50th year anniversary medal and so on. I think that's probably not that important at the moment when our people continue to suffer on the ground.
Well, you see, people who people who serve from the heart, they don't go for recognition and they don't go for awards. That is a reality of life. You've just mentioned the word values. Now, what values in life are important to you that has seen you make this organization such a success?
Well, me personally, I think when I'm on my deathbed, I'd like to die content. And the value is, how do I on a regular basis? It's a retreat that I do. I meditate and I constantly ask, how can I become a better human being? If when we're born in this world, we must have a purpose. What is my purpose, and how can I serve it better? And from past year to this year, if I haven't improved myself as a human being, then I think I'm losing the battle. So that's just me. But as an organization, we've got some key values, and one of the first ones we put is humanity, relevance, innovation. So humanity, and that's what we talk about. That no matter how much absorbed we are with the normal programming, if there is an issue like pandemic, the humanity should come first. So we need to respond to the needs of the human as well as continue with the program, and being relevant and so on. So these are the values that we constantly talk about at the organizational level to make sure that we remain relevant and meet the current needs of the people.
Now, where does Sashi Kiran draw her strength from?
I meditate. I'm a heartfulness meditation trainer, so that's the first place for me. During the pandemic, I was providing a lot of meditation retreat training for youth. It was closed spaces, but youth who had been referred to us, it was a closed space, which was a safe space. I constantly had a lot of meditation retreats online, but a lot of that happens for me. And at that time, actually, when app was launched, Heartfulness Meditation app, it's still there, and a lot of other virtual programs. So no matter how busy I was constantly working on myself, and I constantly have these online programs, and I have one this afternoon where we do self growth. Self growth, how do I become a better human being, kind of thing. So my meditation and the networks that I've had in different networks, it's always good to be able to be challenged by different types of intellect. So, while you have your friends here, you have global NGOs, you have different people in different spaces who are constantly challenging you, and having those networks are important as well.
Now, you have been in the public eye for quite some time, and under your leadership, you have done a lot of good for the community at large. Now, some may suggest that perhaps it's time to take your skills, to take your experience onto the national platform and serve in Parliament. Do you have any political aspirations? And let me ask you, will you contest the next elections?
No,
That's it? No?
I have no political aspirations whatsoever. I have been asked by different political parties, not only for this election, but the past elections as well. Um, I think my niche and the work that happens on the ground is quite different right now. We have great people who are standing, are going to stand for policy making, but I think my skills would probably be better utilized on the ground.
All right. Now, if I said to you to look into your crystal ball, we all have this imaginary crystal ball. What would you wish for?
I don't know about crystal ball, but if I have a magic wand,
Hmm.
um, immediate needs on the ground. So I wish the health services improves, and of course the food and things for the people on the ground, employment and things. But for me, the next big step, I think, is disability care. We do not have disability care in Fiji. A lot of people are walking around with one leg or no legs. We don't have enough prosthetic services. So for me personally, I would like to put my energies in if I am able to generate resources in time to come, to set up disability care, prosthetic support for people living with disabilities. um, that the vulnerable of the world, it's these sorts of investments are very hard and not profit making, so nobody will put their effort into it. And aged care, the aged care facilities that we have are overcrowded, very poorly resourced. But I think the people who have invested in us over the years, the senior citizens who are dying, who are neglected, they need care. So if somewhere I had to put my energies going forward, it would be in disability and aged care facilities.
Let me just say this to you. You've just highlighted a number of things that you'd like to really effectively have a go at. Again, I ask you, don't you think the best place to implement these changes is on the floors of Parliament in Fiji? Would you reconsider perhaps sometime in the near future of no, really, I mean, look at the contribution you've made to the community, and with your magic wand you've just listed a whole lot of things. I mean, consider it, please. And you are a gem, and I believe a person like you in a proper democratic government can really make the right noises and make positive changes for the country. Please consider that in the future. Now, Sashi, as we come to the end, what is your message to the people of Fiji?
People of Fiji, times are hard. But just going back not too long ago, when our fathers had very little, um, in the olden days when there was no government support. When I think about my father and his brothers and how little they probably earned at that time, they invested in schools, they built road access, they built cemeteries. Everybody contributed to the development of the place. We are in a better place in many ways, people who are affording at the moment. I think if every mandli, if every church, if every mandir that's out there considers the plight of the people around them, if you have the potential to raise resources and look at just your own community and the vulnerable that in your own community that needs support, and if each group, each person who has affordability does that, people don't have to suffer the way they are suffering at the moment. So I think we need to draw our strength from our ancestors. I think we need to draw strength from each other. The whole world is suffering right now, so we can't expect donors and outside parties to come and help us all the time. We need to be able to look out for the people who are in need right now around us and do whatever we can.
Well said. Now, by speaking on Sashi Singh's Talking Point program this afternoon, do you think you will come in for some criticism or some further attacks?
You know, when I was small, I was crying because somebody had said something, and my father said to me, and probably this was high school. He asked me why I was crying. I said somebody said something to me, and he said, "Who matters to you in life?" I said, "You do." He said, "Did I say anything to you?" I said, "No." He said, "Then why are you crying?" So over time, I think I've developed a thick enough skin to know that people who matter, who critique, I take criticisms from, I take all criticism on board and see, okay, is this true? Do I need to change? But I think I have a very wonderful board, friends, circle. There are certain people who say things, and I do take it into account. But if I think we are on the right path, then criticisms really don't matter. And that's why you see we don't really defend ourselves. People criticize us. It's beautiful. Other people stand up for us. But unless there's a need, we're not going to stand up and, defend ourselves. So I'm not that concerned about criticism. Let's put it that way.
Wonderful. Because if we don't build thick skins or have thick skins, then I wouldn't be doing a program like this, which to some people is quite confrontational. Look, let me say to you at this stage, sorry, you were saying
And I
something.
must say, I thank you for this program because I think there's a lot that cannot be said. There's a lot that people do not know, even in diaspora. And this platform allows many critical issues to be discussed. So thank you for making that effort on your Sundays and your personal time to do what you're doing.
Pleasure is all mine. Now, I know you have not asked me to say this. You have not asked me to promote Friend in any way, but I feel it's my duty and my obligation to allow you, perhaps if you could send me your bank account details immediately after the program, I will post that on my SSTP page, and or unless you have information that you can share right now, because I've got, for instance, David Anthony from San Francisco in the USA, has asked directly whether people from overseas, how can they contribute financially to Friend?
So our account is 6125208, one of the
Slow
staff.
down, hang on, slow down. Which bank?
So Friend, ANZ Bank.
So,
I've put it in
ladies
the
and
chat.
gentlemen, it's the ANZ Bank. So that's
Yes.
very quickly written, ANZ. And the name of the account is Friend,
Just
F.R.I.E.N.D.
that's right.
Okay, the account number slowly, please.
6125208. But the,
6125208.
but the better would be if people can write to us, and then we can give them the full, BSN, all those international codes and so on. And we can also issue a receipt. So if people can write to us at friend, that's FRIEND, at connect, CONNECT, .com.fj.
Sashi, do me a favor. Right after the show, if you or one of your assistants can email me the bank account details and that email, I'll put that on my SSTP page. and then people can communicate with you directly. And let me say to you, um, if ever you want to get onto this program to share some of your work or to share some hardship or difficulties that you're going through in Fiji due to natural disasters or what have you, you have an open platform here, Sashi, to come on and to share that. But for giving up your time, I know I contacted you some time back. You're such a busy lady. You mentioned earlier on that you've got another workshop to do just after this. Look, thank you so very much for taking part in today's episode of Sashi Singh's Talking Point. I wish you all the very, very best with your NGO. You are providing crucial services to the really needy people in Fiji. Continue the good work, Sashi, and like I said, feel free to contact me. We'll share your message with the world on this program. And again, that open invitation stands. So thank you very much. Big Vinaka Vakalevu,
Thank you.
Dhanyavad to you, and wishing you a very blessed Sunday.
Thank you very much to you and to all the guests who've been listening and for all your support. We do not know many of the people who have been standing up for us and supporting us and putting letters to the editors and so on. I just want to say thank you for all the support. It counts.
You're
Thank
more than welcome. And again, all the very best for the future, for Friend, and to you. God bless
you.
you. Bye bye now.
Bye-bye.
Well, I thank all those viewers who have taken time. Oh, Sashi, before you go, just before you go, when you have time in the next couple of days, if you could visit episode 12 and perhaps address some of the issues people have raised on the comment section. And it will be nice if Friend can respond to them directly. I think it will augur well for the viewing public as well as for your organization to have some sort of interaction with the viewers.
Thank you. Will do. Definitely.
Thank you so much again. Like I was saying, I thank all those viewers who've taken time to provide their positive feedback with regards to this program. And well, that's all for episode 12 for this week. A big thank you to my regular contributor, Nikhil Singh, for his input in the program today, as always, and for his research assistance as well. Greatly appreciated, Nikhil. And to my family for their support on the technical side, to Vince. And very importantly, let me acknowledge the kind assistance of my better half, Roma, because nowadays she designs the beautiful posters designed by Rom Shens. Thank you very much, Roma, indeed. Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to thank you, all our dedicated viewers, for watching this program today. Please follow and like the SSTP page so that you can get instant notifications of this program. Now, I wish you all a very safe and blessed week. In closing, I'll leave you with this quote from former US President Barack Obama. Barack Obama said, "Our responsibilities as citizens is to address the inequalities and injustices that linger, and we must secure our birthright freedoms for all people." I'll repeat that. Our responsibilities as citizens is to address the inequalities and injustices that linger, and we must serve our birthright freedoms for all people. Thank you very much for your time this afternoon. I am Sashi Singh, wishing you all a very good day. Goodbye, namaste, and nisa more. Thank you.